Do you need a new bookcase for your home? I just finished building this bookcase for my home office. And in this video, I'm going to show you how I custom built it DIY. More information about this project, including a breakdown of materials and costs, is available on my blog, eyecatcherliving.com. You'll also find a breakdown of the tools I used for this project there. I've included a link below in the description so you can access it at any time. I looked at multiple stores online for a prefabricated cabinetry and bookshelf set that would work within my home office, but I couldn't find anything that would fit the wall space or within my budget. So I decided to custom build it. The wall is about 152.5 inches long with an 8-foot high ceiling. I'm going to show you some of the building materials I'm going to be using for the office bookcase build. These are 30 by 30 upper kitchen cabinets, 12 inches deep. I prefer to use 24-inch deep cabinets, but we're not going to have space for that. So this is the 12-inch option that we're going to use as lower cabinets. We have our pre-drilled melamine boards here that are going to be used as the side paneling for the bookcase, along with the shelving underneath. I got a bunch more of the side panels out in the garage, along with 2x4s to build out the base for the entire cabinetry and bookshelf. Behind that is the unfinished boards that are going to be used as the countertop between the cabinets and the bookshelf. And tucked there in the back is the crown molding that'll go at the top. And we also have an assortment of tools that I'm going to be using. I know this pile is going to grow a bit bigger, but these are some of the tools I'm going to be using to build out the bookcase. The first part of the building process is going to be building out a base for the cabinetry. I'm using upper cabinets which don't have the base already built into them. I need to remove the baseboard to accommodate the deframing. I want to preserve this back piece as much as possible because I'm going to reuse it once the cabinets are installed. So I'm going to be using a razor blade, a wide spackling knife, and a wrecking bar to remove it. But I'm also marking the side pieces where I need to use an oscillating multi-tool to cut them and remove them. So that's what I'm going to do first. I used a scrap corner of baseboard so I could cut the baseboard at a 45-degree angle where the new baseboard will land. Once the baseboard was removed, I set about cutting 12.5-foot sections of 2x4s to build out the cabinetry base. First using my circular saw, then using my miter saw. Then I measured the distance between the two sections, cut additional 2x4s to fit, and spaced them out. I didn't have 2-inch brad nails handy, so I used 3-inch wood screws to tie the base frame together. Once the frame was complete, I fitted it into place. Then used my stud finder to locate the studs in the wall, and again used 3-inch screws to secure the frame to the wall. So I now have the base installed, built out of 2x4s. This installation would have been a little bit easier if I had a 2-inch brad nail gun, but the one one I'm borrowing is still for 1.25 inches, so those aren't going to be long enough. I'm using 3-inch screws instead, work perfectly fine. It's pretty solid. Everything's level, and the base is secured to the wall, also with the 3-inch screws. So it's not going anywhere. Next phase is going to be installing the cabinets. The wall is 152 22 inches. The cabinets are 30 inches long each, and there are 5 of them, so there's going to be an inch of extra space on each end of the cabinetry. So I'm going to get started on that now. So the cabinets are now placed. The next thing I'm going to do is screw the cabinets into the studs in the wall. I also need to screw them into each other. And I also have this outlet that I want to have access to within the cabinet. So I'm going to mark out where that outlet's going to end up in the cabinet and cut a space out for it so we can continue to use it in the future. So I was cutting through the back of the cabinet. I was expecting the wood paneling to give a little bit once I cut through it. Instead, the electrical plate was right behind it, and I wasn't aware of that initially. So I ended up with both a mangled outlet cover as well as the outlet itself. It's unusable. So I've turned out the power, and I'm going to replace the outlet. So an update on the outlet that I was working on. Turns out that the wiring in the outlet, A, is very old, and B, is more complicated than I was anticipating. I looked up several videos online for a comparable situation, didn't find any, so I'm going to leave this to an electrician to resolve. I did test out the outlet, and it does actually still work, and I haven't hit anything that would cause a fire, so I'm very fortunate in that respect. But in the interim, I'm just adding this outlet cover to keep it covered up, and I'm going to continue on with the rest of the build. So I now have the cabinets installed. I've got them all tied together with 3-inch screws at their corners. I've got 3-inch screws going directly into the back wall studs, and I've also got some additional screws going to the base to make sure it's not going anywhere. It's pretty solid right now. My next step is going to be to add the 1-inch filler. I've got these gaps on each end of the cabinets. I got this it's currently 1 by 2.5. I got to cut this down both height-wise and lengthwise to trim it down so it'll be 1 inch. But I'm going to be screwing these in directly from the cabinets into the sides. I measured out the height and length of each cut, then used my miter saw followed by a borrowed table saw to cut the trim pieces. Then trim them down further using my oscillating multi-tool. I use 3-inch screws to secure the top and bottom of each trim piece. So I've now finished installing the lower cabinets. The next step is going to be installing the countertop. It's about 12.5 feet long. They don't make that normally at your local lumber retailer unless it's custom cut. So what I'm doing is merging an 8-foot piece with a 6-foot piece, and I'll put some wood filler in between them. I'm going to leave a 13-inch cut wide, which will allow an inch overlap from the bookcase over the lower cabinets. And I'm going to get started on that now. I cut the countertops using my circular saw, then trimmed them down further with the multi-tool. So I've now got the countertops cut and installed. Some additional trimming and wood filler work that needs to be done. Over here, there's a 3/8 of an inch variance between the wall here and here. So I had to do some trimming of the board here, so that would be square. In the middle area, part of this board got cut a little too tightly. So I'm filling this part in with a wood filler. This is the median line. I will be adding wood filler to that at the very end. And as you can see, there's a pretty straight line all across the back area up until you get to this corner. So what I'm going to do is fill in this back area with wood filler and then trim the front section a bit so we get 13 inches even across the entire countertop. I used the wood filler to begin rebuilding the corner of the board, then trimmed down the countertops using my multi-tool, ultimately using a level to make sure that the edges were straight. Then I used 180 grit sandpaper to smooth out the countertops. With the countertops ready to be installed, I added support strips in the middle of the cabinets and applied liquid nails along the top of the cabinet frames. So I now have the countertops installed. I used liquid nails to attach them to the lower cabinets. Got all this extra weight sitting on top of the countertops to make sure it bonds properly. It's the first time I'm using this, so I hope this all goes according to plan. I still have some more work to do on those lower cabinets with the wood filler. You may notice that the doors are not all level. That's how they were delivered, but they don't look very attractive when they're not leveled. So I'm going to be working on that later. But in the interim, I want to start working on the bookcase. I've got these side panels that I need to cut. They're about 16 3/4 inches, which will give me some space to put in a top piece. So I'm going to start working on cutting those, as well as getting the shelvings themselves trimmed down. So that's next. So I now have each of the side panels cut. Because these panels are pre-drilled, I needed to establish a starting point for where my cuts were going to be. Basically what I did was took a tape measure, measured 1 inch from the middle of one of the holes, and that created a consistent starting point for each of the boards. Once that was cut, I was able to measure the fuller length, and they're all consistently cut at this point. One thing to note about these boards, one side is taped and the other side is not taped. And that's important if you're doing a single board or single panel bookcase, because you're going to need to flip the board around and then cut so that they match symmetrically. I am doing 2 panels back to back for each section of the bookcase with a piece of trim overlapping that, so that will not be an issue for me. Last thing I'll point out is you have some stickers sometimes on the front side where you want to put your shelving, so I gotta take a razor blade and clean that up. But otherwise, excited to get these boards into position so I can then start working on the shelving. Once I had the stickers removed, I used an alcohol swab to remove the leftover residue. With the panels cleaned, I measured out where each panel would be placed, then drew 3 parallel lines marking the center point and the edge lines for each panel. Once the liquid nails had cured, I used wood filler to fill in the gaps behind and between the countertop boards. I used a small piece of filler rod to fill in the worst of the gaps. Next was cutting each board that will tie each of the side panels together. Similar to the countertop, this required shortening the length and width of each board. I tested the first top piece to be sure everything fit snugly and level. Everything looked good, so I screwed the first panel into the wall using the 3-inch screws. Then I attempted to nail the top section of the melamine panels using a borrowed brad nail gun and 1 1/4 inch brad nails. This approach didn't work. The nail gun didn't fire reliably, and the melamine boards were too heavy, and the brad nails themselves weren't strong enough. I also tried using pocket screws, but the screws basically bounced off the melamine boards. So I brainstormed and decided to pivot. I grabbed a scrap piece of melamine side panel, applied liquid nails, and let it dry overnight. To my relief, this approach worked. I added extra liquid nails along the inside seams for a tighter bond. From there, it was a matter of ensuring that each panel was level as it was installed, trimming the bottom as needed so that it was snug against the wall, and adding liquid nails along the seams. The most challenging panel was the last one due to the variances in the walls. The side panel had to be trimmed in the back, shimmed up at the base, and I had to add a 3/8 inch filler trim piece between the wall and the panel to make it level in each direction. The brad nail gun I had borrowed from my neighbor simply wasn't working, so I ultimately decided to get a new brad nailer. It made all the difference for the rest of the build. With the panels installed, it was time to install the trim pieces along the top of the panels and along the panel seams. Then I installed crown molding. I added caulking along each seam. With the bookcase frame in place, I got to work cutting and fitting the shelves. I discovered that not all the pre-drilled holes were drilled in the same depth, so that the shelf support pins wouldn't go in all the way. I used a similar sized drill bit and made the holes deeper. Once the shelves were cut, I used rubbing alcohol to clean their surfaces. So I now have the shelves to my bookshelf installed. Despite my best efforts, I do have shelves that are not level. And my hack to resolving that is using the pads that you put underneath furniture. Cut these little strips out and placing them on top of the shelf support. And now the shelf is level. So if you ever have the same issue, this is my hack to resolving that. So I've now finished installing the bookshelf and confirmed that all of the shelves are level. The next step is going to be giving the countertop and the lower cabinets a light sanding using 150 grit sandpaper so that I can paint the whole lower area so it matches the bookshelves. So I'm going to finish sanding the lower cabinets. I was using 150 grit sandpaper. That was A, to smooth out any rough edges, and 2, to give something for the paint to bond to on the cabinets and on the countertop. A few other additional recommendations I want to make if you're doing your own projects. One, when you're done with a painting project, rinse it out with water and then stick it into a plastic bag and into your refrigerator. That'll preserve your brush for your future projects for whether it's another week or a year from now. You'll still be able to use that brush. If you're using oil-based paint, you can basically forget about it. That will dry out no matter what, and you don't want to clog your septic tank with that. But water-based paints, Just rinse it out, stick it in the bag, your refrigerator, and you'll be good to go for your next project. Secondly, with rollers, if you end up with a whole lot of paint buildup on your handle, don't throw it out. It's perfectly usable. Take a sharp edge, like a spackling knife, and just scrape off the edge. You'll get it right back down to the original metal, and you'll be able to use that roller just like it was the first time that you used it. And the last point I want to make, whenever you're pouring from your paint can, I always recommend first reading the instructions in the back in terms of temperature and coverage, but pour from this side. Reason being, the next time you come back to your paint can, you've got two different paint cans here that look very similar, and you don't want to cover up the information you have here. I've got eggshell and I've got flat, and I want to be able to know that information for the next time I come to this can so I can reuse it. If I had poured from the front, you can tell from here all that information would get covered up. So those are my DIY tips for the day, and then you get started painting. After the first coat of paint dried, I smoothed out each of the surfaces with 150 grit sandpaper. I also noticed that the eggshell paint from the first coat didn't match the shelving well, so I switched to flat paint, which worked perfectly. Once all the paint was dry, I sanded off the excess paint that ended up on the back of the cabinet doors. While I was working on the cabinets, I realized the original 3 3/4 inch baseboard was not going to be tall enough. So I got a 4 1/4 inch boards and cut out a new baseboard. So I now have the framing of the cabinets, the countertop, and the doors all painted. I gave the back of the doors a little bit of sanding to take off the excess paint. I've also got the baseboards in and added a little bit of caulking to fill in all the gaps, which leaves me only one thing left to do, and that's to install the cabinet doors. So I'm going to get on that now. So when I was removing the cabinet doors, I learned that the hardware is designed with a little bit of give where the screw goes, which will help make the doors level. I also found that the doors slammed really loudly when they were opening and closing them, so similar to other areas, with the bookshelf, I added some furniture padding to the side of the door, and that makes for a much softer close. So with that, I'm going to put these in, and it should be level in the end. So now the doors are level and it's a much quieter and softer close. The bookshelf is now completely installed, and we can't wait to start loading it up with the books and other items that we currently have stored in our basement. I still have some other things to work on as part of this office remodel, including refinishing the 2 desks, and I'll provide more updates once those projects are complete. More information about this bookcase build, including a breakdown of materials and costs, as well as the tools that I used, is available on my blog, eyecatcherliving.com. You can find a link to the website below in the description. If you found this video helpful, please be sure to leave a comment below and click on the subscribe button. Otherwise, thanks for watching.